with you, High Noon Leatherworks, for another leather adventure. And today we're going to start a new project, and we're going to do a quick sheath for a large knife, or in this case a machete type knife. So we're going to use a scrap piece of black leather. It's probably about 6 to 8 ounce, and we're just gonna cut it out. We're gonna do some lacing, and then we're gonna do some rivets to hold it onto our belt. So come on in and let's get started. Alright, so what I've got is a large knife or a machete type blade. It's a marbles, pretty nice, fairly sharp, and it is new, so I haven't done anything with it except take it out of the package. And what I'm going to do to start off with is I want to make sure if I contoured this sheath to the blade, you'll notice down by the handle, our blade is approximately 2¼ inches. As it goes up, like most machete blades, it gets bigger at the end. So if I try to contour this leather to that blade, then I'm going to have an issue with, as I put it in on this part, as I stick it in this end, it's going to want to cut through that leather, or it'll eventually wear through there if I can even get it in there. So what I want to do is I want to contour the end, and when I get to the highest point of the blade, or the thickest point, that's where I want to run it straight down to my handle. So that's going to be the game plan. And the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and measure the highest point, or the thickest point of the blade. It looks like 2½ inches, just shy of 2½ inches. So I'm going to go down by the handle, go from the back up 2½ inches. And then I'll take my pencil and I'll make a mark. Now I've got the rough side of my leather up, so I can make all my markings and cuts on this side, and you won't see anything on the other side. So I'm going to mark the highest point here on my leather, right next to my blade. Then I'm going to go ahead and stay just off of the edge of the blade with my pencil, and I can use this pencil, and it shows up, the marking shows up on the black leather. So I'll come down. I'm going to leave a little space. I'm not going to put it right up against the blade, probably about 1/8 inch, just to the highest point. Now what I can do is mark where my handle begins on both sides of the blade. So I'm just putting a mark on each side so that I know where that handle would stop. Then I can move the blade, and I'm just going to rotate it for now, because I'm not positive what my next step's going to be yet. And I can move my straight edge to where I marked it at the widest part of the blade, and down on the mark at 2½ inches, and all the way down to to where I marked where the handle was. So I'll go ahead and mark that line, and I can see all that really well. So the first thing I'm going to do is slide my blade out of the way a little bit, and I'm going to make that cut. And I did put in a nice, fresh, clean blade, so it's good and sharp. Again, this is approximately 6 to 8 ounce leather, so it'll be a lighter weight sheath. And I'll cut that off there, so when I get down to the other end here, I can do the same. I can go ahead and cut that off and get rid of that scrap. Now I have, if I flip my blade back over and lay it on there, you can see I have the contour of the blade, but down at the handle end it's straight, so it widens out here so that it doesn't cut as I put it in and out. So that's my theory behind that. And then I want to have plenty of room to fold this back end over to do my belt loop. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this down, measure it, because I have to put holes in here for my lace to lace this up. So I'm going to give myself a 1/2 inch all the way around and put my lacing in the middle of that, or maybe a hair closer to the edge than that. So I want to make sure I have at least a 1/2 inch. And then down here on this end I'll measure to 3 inches, because I measured 2.5 inches from the back out to the edge. So if I add a 1/2 inch for my lacing, that would be 3 inches. Make sure nothing's moved. Then what I can do is I can take my blade and roll it, making sure it doesn't move or slip on me. And then I can go ahead and roughly mark this side, and then what I'll do is I'll fold it over and cut this side from the side I've already got contoured. So I know I want a 1/2 inch on this side, so I'm just gonna make a rough mark here, and then I'm gonna go 3.5 inches so that I have extra from the back side of the blade. So on this side it was 3, this side I'm going to go 3.5, make sure I have plenty of extra. Then I'll come down to the widest point just like I did on the other side and do a 1/2 inch. And I'm just going around and marking that at a 1/2 inch until I get to the widest part of the blade again. just going to make a rough line so that I don't cut too close. So then what I'll do is I'll cut outside of that line or away from it this direction to make sure I'm not getting too close to my projected line when I fold that over. And then I can cut this out of the way. Notice I'm not cutting past my handle where my handle starts, because I'm going to use some of that for my belt loop. So I can get rid of this out of my way. Now I can literally take this whole thing and let's fold it over. And I want to make sure I have my 1/2 inch, so I'm going to pull this all the way to the line that I made 1/2 inch. I'm going to match that up. And then once I get that fairly matched up there, I can go ahead and mark. I could go ahead and cut it, but I don't want to take the chance of cutting the other side, my other leather that I've already finished. So I'm going to mark that. It should be very close to the other line that I already marked. Make sure I mark it good enough that I can see to cut. Then I can go ahead and cut on that line. And the same thing, I'm going to cut it straight across so I can get rid of that piece of scrap. Then I should be able to test fit it again. We should have a nice straight matching side here, and it looks really good. So what we'll do next is I'm going to cut this on the back. I want to measure it and cut it on the back here. Make sure I have plenty of room for my handle. So I'm going to make another mark, and the handle marks look like they still line up with where I marked it before. Make sure I still have my 1/2 inch all the way around on this side so that I know where to make my loop for the belt loop. Now I'm going to measure from that line up. I want my belt loop to be at least 2 inches. So if I leave a 1/2 inch to attach with my rivets, then that'd be a 1/2 inch, and I can mark that or just subtract that, but I can mark it and then go 2 1/4 inches because of my fold over, and then I want to make sure I go another 1/2 inch for the back side when it folds over to here. So I want to double that. So right now that is at 3 1/4 inches from my line where my handle begins down here. So that's 3 1/4 inches, so that would be 6 1/2. So I'll want to go all the way up to 6 1/2 inches, and I think I'll go ahead and go to 7, and I can always trim it down. That way I make sure that I have plenty. So I'll go 7 inches. I'll mark it on both sides of the handle. Then I'll go ahead and draw my line between those two marks. And then I'll cut that. So I'll cut that straight across on that pencil mark I just made. Get rid of my scrap. Then I'll need to figure out how wide I want that to be. So I'd like for it to be at least as wide as the handle. So I'll put this back where I have my 1/2 inch measurement down here. Double check it. And then I can go ahead and mark the width. So I'm going to go at the widest point of the blade at this end by the handle, which is 2 inches. So I'm going to make it 2 1/2 inches wide from the center of my handle here. So I'll mark that above where my handle starts. And then I'll run that up on this side to the widest part of the handle on the right side. I'll make a mark, and then I know that I can measure 2 1/2 inches from that mark over. And then I can draw that all the way up from my mark where my handle begins all the way to the end, because I already cut the end off at 6 1/2 inches. Double check this at 2 1/2. Make my mark here. And then I want to cut all the way down to where the handle begins. Then I can cut over and back down to this area. Same way on this side. So let's go ahead and cut those 2 marks first, making sure that you don't go too far. So make sure you stop on that mark. Then I can come over this direction where I have my mark, toward me. That's the top of the blade or the beginning of the handle. And I'll just go ahead and cut that straight across. Cut that off, get that out of the way. And then the same way on the other end. I'll want to cut that straight across. With this end. So let's double check that before I cut that other side. Make sure I get the right mark here. Always work on the old adage, measure twice, cut once. And even then, sometimes you make a mistake. So we can get rid of that piece. And then I'll go ahead and cut this little tab off that I had left over here on my original side. Get rid of that. Then I should be able to just fold this over and get rid of the tab on this side, even with the other side. So that cut that off. Now I've got a smooth transition here. And if I need to do any trimming to make sure it matches perfect, now's the time to get everything lined up. Looks like I need to do just a hair trim here, which is not a big problem. Get that out of the way. And then I'm going to flip it over once I have it lined up. And I'm going to double check the other side and make sure everything matches up. So I've got a small little trim to do here at the tip, which is very small, but that'll make it perfect. So then the next step is I want to do my checking on my belt loop. So that will look like so. And if I allow a 1/2 inch, that'll end up being a 2 3/4 inch belt loop, which I'm going to leave it that big, just in case I use a bigger utility belt for this. And then I want to round that off, and I don't have a big enough rounding punch for that, so I'll use just a center out of a roll of tape, and that will allow me to round those tips off. And I don't really want that big a radius, so the next thing I normally do is I'll take a 1/4 and I'll just radius a 1/4 on both corners. And all that does is take that pointed tip off of there, and it still gives me plenty of room side to side to put my rivets. So I'll just radius that to that 1/4, and I'll show that to you here in just a second. Get rid of those little pieces, and that's the radius now. Instead of having a sharp pointed edge, now I've got a nice radius on those corners. Make it nice and smooth. So the next thing I'm going to do is I need to measure get my poly board out. I'm going to measure where I want these holes for my lacing. So I'll pull a piece of lace out that I'm going to use. I'm going to use this light gray against that black. It'll look really nice. And then I'll just pull out and double check which one of these I need to use, which punch for the lacing. So that one fits really nice in there. Give me plenty of room. Won't have to struggle lacing this up. So I found my punch. That one happens to be a 3/16. And I can go ahead and get my mallet and I'm going to start on this side. So let's go ahead and I'm going to come down a 1/4 inch from the edge and put the first one centered. A 1/4 inch from the edge and 3/8 from the side. Let's put a little mark there. Let's see what that's going to look like if I put that right in the center. You might want to go a 1/4 inch from the edge and a 1/4 inch from the end. Yeah, that's going to be much better. So I'll do a 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, and then I'll do them from that first one. Then I'll do them a 1/2 inch apart. I think that'd be plenty. So let's go ahead and I'll spin this around. I'll keep that 1/4 inch away from the edge. Let me move this poly board while I mark them. And we'll just go, and I'm going to use a stylus. We'll just go a 1/2 inch centered. All the way down, and all I'm doing is putting a little divot in that leather with that stylus every 1/2 inch so I know where to punch my holes. And I just have to do that on one side. Then I can flip it over or fold it over and transfer those holes to the other side. So I'll move that down. Now as I get down here on this radius, I'm going to have to watch that I still stay right at a 1/4 inch away from this edge so that I keep it symmetrical. As I round that radius. And if you need to, you can measure that 1/4 inch from the edge up and make some kind of mark on the back if you want to mark them on the back with a white marker or something like that. If you're using black leather, you can do that. I'm just eyeballing the 1/4 inch from the edge. as I make my marks. Alright, so I've got my marks all the way down to where it's going to fold. So the first thing I'm going to do once I've got my marks is take my poly board, my punch, and my mallet, and again I'm going to put that punch right in the center, or right over the top of the center of that mark, and then work my way down. Alright, so I'm all the way down to the end. So there's all my holes on one side. All the way down. So now I could fold this over and you could go ahead and punch through both thicknesses if you wanted to, but that would just make it a little more difficult. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and see if my stylus will show up. It doesn't show up great. So let me see if a Sharpie will show up. And it does. I'm kind of shocked that it would show up on black, but it does show up pretty good. So I'll just work my way down, making sure I keep this even. Keep it lined up, and I can get several holes marked as I work my way down. Slide this down. Keep continuing marking my holes. Again, if you'd want to, you could punch through both sides at the same time. However you want to do it. I just prefer doing it this way because I have a lot less trouble with my punch wanting to stick. So I just keep working my way down, marking each hole, and making sure that my leather is nice and even as I work my way down. And you can see those really well, shockingly enough. But then I can take my punch, start again on this side, my holes punched. A lot of waste in those punched holes. Now I can fold that over. It's ready to lace, and I can go ahead and punch my holes and put my rivets in before I do my lacing. So that'll be my next step. So remember, I wanted to go about a 1/2 inch folded over. So there's approximately a 1/2 inch, and again that leaves me with about 3 inches of space. So I can use that on a 2-inch belt, or I can use it on a wider 3-inch utility belt, whatever it is I want to put it on, and it doesn't limit me to what belt I have to wear. So I'm going to go ahead and put a hole a 1/2 inch in on each side, and I am going to go through both thicknesses at the same time. And I'm just going to eyeball from the other side to try to match it. And there, if I hold this up, you should be able to see the 2 holes that go all the way through for the rivets. So let's go ahead and get our hardware. Get a couple of 5/16 rivets and a couple of caps. And I'll get a setter and an anvil. And I'm going to put my finished, or my rivet, through this side. Put my cap on the back. Flip that over, put it on the anvil, and then use my setter and my mallet. And then do the same with the other hole. And there's my rivets for my belt loop. So now I'll throw my punch and my setter and my anvil back where they belong, and then I'll get this out of my way, and then I can go ahead and start with the lacing. Now I may, depending on, this is pretty long, so I may end up having to use a couple of pieces of lace, which is not that big a deal. I'll just pick out some of the longer lace that I have, and I want to make sure that it's consistent thickness or width all the way down, which this one gets a little narrow at the end, so I don't want to use it. Here, this one's very consistent. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick. This one's very consistent, so I'll pick 2 to start out with. And what I'm going to do is down here on the, when I end, I'm going to want to put a knot in there, and then when I begin, I'm going to want to put a knot back here. So let's go ahead and let's just start by tying a knot in our lace. And I always like to take a pair of needle nose pliers and grab a hold of that knot and work it and make sure it's nice and tight, and it's going to be big enough where it doesn't come through that hole. So as I fold this over and I put it through the first hole, I'm starting at the end, I'm going to make sure that my knot is on the back side, so I can pull that through. Then I want to use the finished side, keep the finished side of my lace out. Now that does take a little more time to make sure that you're getting that facing out, but it's only seconds. It's not going to take you a lot of time to do that. Now I'm going around under the bottom and then pulling that lace back over the top and then snugging it down. Now, I don't want to pull it so tight that it's going to fold my point, but I want it tight enough to where I can actually see it pulling on that a little bit. Same thing, I'll go around, underneath, come back up, and make sure that I'm getting that finished side and snug it down. I'll put my thumb there so it doesn't go back on me, and I'll continue to do that. And you can see how my lace is coming together. It's starting to look really nice. So I'll go ahead and continue doing that, and we'll fast forward as I'm doing it, and then I get to the other end, or I get to the point to where I'm going to splice in, then I'll stop to regular time and we'll come back. Alright, so I'm to the point where I'm going to have to put in another piece of lace, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to put this knot to where it ends up on the very back side. I have to have plenty of space to get the knot started. And once I get the knot, now you can see that's going to leave a pretty good sized knot. So I'm not going to do it that way, no pun intended. I am going to go ahead and continue this piece. See if we can't keep it to where we don't have a big knot on there. And then I can pull this piece back through. Like so. And terminate it in the back as a single knot. It will have one, if you could use, any way you could use a single piece of lace, it'd be great, but if you can't, at least you can terminate it to where it's not going to have that great big knot where you put them together. And then I can cut that excess off like so, and you're only going to have that small termination knot there. Then I can start my new piece of lace. Again, if you could get this lace long enough or cut it long enough, it'd be great, but sometimes you just can't. So there's my new piece of lace. And I put the knot on the back just like I did when I started. Now I can continue to the next hole. Keeping that snug. And I just keep that, pulling that snug as I go to each new set of holes. And I hold my finger on that, or you can squeeze it with your finger and your thumb on both sides like that, and that'll keep the tension on your knots as you work your way up or down your seam, and that'll keep it nice and taut, because you definitely don't want that to be loose. So we're getting here to the end. I'm snugging that up, and then I think I'm going to do the same knot that I did where I spliced it. So I'll come in, pull that good and tight, fold that over the back, and I can take a little pair of pliers and I'll take that stylus and I'll get that started on the end. You could use anything that's got a point on it, as long as you can get that trapped under there. You can pull that loop up and just keep pushing that lace through there until you can see it come out the other side, like so. Then you can pull that back through. Now, once I have that terminated like that, I'm going to make a single knot because I don't want that coming loose. And then work it down against that loop that I just put in there. So there's my termination. Now I could leave this, put some beads or whatever on it, but on this case I just want to cut that off, let that be my finished lacing, and then test fit the machete or the large blade so it fits really good. And as I slide that in and out, I always make sure I push the backbone against the leather so that I'm not cutting or using the blade against my lace. So as I put it in and out, I always run it to the spine or the top of the blade. Alright, so there's another project in the books. Got a laced large blade knife or machete made out of just scrap black leather. Fits really nice. If you wanted to, you could put a strap around that. I don't think you're going to have any problems as far as the weight of it coming out. So you could use it as a cross draw. You could use it on the right, left. Doesn't really matter which side you're going to put it on, unless you prefer right or left-handed. But I'll probably use it as a cross draw because I'm left-handed. So that'll work out really good. So it turned out nice. I've got a nice 3-inch loop to put on my belt. I like the gray, the light gray lace against the black leather. So fairly quick, easy, not a lot of material to use, so you could do it inexpensive, and now you can carry that out in the woods with you. So I appreciate you coming along. Come back next time and we'll do another new project. So as I like to always say, please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.